بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وقيل لا يفيد العلم إلا نظريا وليس بشيء، لأن العلم بالتواتر حاصل لمن ليس له أهلية النظر كالعامية، إذ النظر ترتيب أمور معلومة أو مظنونة يتوصل بها إلى علوم أو ظنون، وليس في العامي أهلية ذلك، فلو كان نظريا لما حصل لهم. ولاح بهذا التقرير الفرق بين العلم الضروري والعلم النظري، إذ الضروري يفيد العلم بلا استدلال، والنظري يفيده لكن مع الاستدلال على الإفادة، وأن الضروري يحصل لكل سامع، والنظري لا يحصل إلا لمن فيه أهلية النظر. وإنما أبهمت شروط المتواتر في الأصل لأنه على هذه الكيفية ليس من مباحث علم الإسناد، إذ علم الإسناد يبحث فيه عن صحة الحديث أو ضعفه ليعمل به أو يترك من حيث صفات الرجال وصيغ الأداء، والمتواتر لا يبحث عن رجاله بل يجب العمل به من غير بحث. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned that some people claimed that Tawātur gives ilm an-Naḍar. However, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah rejected the claim, and he now explains why mutawatir narrations give the benefit of ilm al-daruri. He says, لأن العلم بالتواتر حاصل لمن ليس له أهلية النظر كالعامة, because knowledge via tawatur is obtained by the one who does not have the capability to contemplate, like a layman, like a lay person. Here it would have been better if Ibn Hajar rahmallah said bil mutawatiri rather than bit tawaturi. He said لأن العلم بالتواتر. It would have been better if he said لأن العلم بالمتواتر. This is mentioned by Allama Qasim rahmallah in Al-Qawl al-Mubtakar on page 34. Al-awla ay yuqal al-ilm bil-mutawatir. Alternatively, Allama Al-Qani rahmallah suggested that he could have rather said بمضمون الخبر المتواتر. لو قال لأن العلم بمضمون الخبر المتواتر حاصل كان بينا. So even if a person is incompetent, then too he will obtain conviction through tawatur. كالعامية. He gives the example, he says like a lay person. We mentioned previously that it is definite that a layman would obtain knowledge through tawatur. A person doesn't need a university degree to know that it is daytime at midday. Ibn Hajar rahmallah explains, إذ النظر ترتيب أمور معلومة أو مظنونة يتوصل بها إلى علوم أو ظنون. Since contemplation, the word an-Naḍar, what it refers to putting in order things which you know, umurin ma'luma, or things which you just presume. يتوصل بها إلى علوم أو ظنون, and through that, by putting into order things that you already know or things that you doubt, you now come to know about knowledge, or you come to know about presumptions. So Nadhar is combining known or doubtful things to reach a conclusion. It may be translated as an inference. A person makes an inference by combining different things that he thinks, and thereby he learns things that he did not previously know. So this is called tasdiqat and tasawwurat in the science of mantiq. You can take the following example that is given in the books of mantiq to understand this, that if a person sees smoke, then he will conclude that there is fire. However, to reach that conclusion, he needs to know that smoke emanates from fire. So this is a correct inference. But then an inference could also be incorrect. For example, a person sees a black bat. Then he sees another black bat. And then he sees a third black bat. So now if he concludes that all bats are black, then this conclusion is incorrect. So therefore an inference could be correct or it could be incorrect. However, the point here is that in order to make an inference in the first place, a person needs to possess some pieces of information and have some knowledge to reach the conclusion. The knowledge required may be at a basic level, or it even may be at an advanced level of knowledge. وليس في العامية أهلية ذلك فلو كان نظريا لما حصل لهم. A layman does not have the capability of putting together various branches of knowledge. So therefore he is saying that if Tawātur gave the benefit of Nadhari, then a layman would have not got knowledge through Tawātur. So when the knowledge required is that of even a slightly advanced level, then a layman would not have the competence to infer and reach a conclusion, because the layman does not possess the required knowledge. So through this, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah proves that Mutawātir gives the benefit of ilm al-daruri and not of ilm al-nadhari. Now, since he was writing this book for beginners, Ibn Hajar rahmallah felt that it would be useful to properly explain the difference between ilm al-daruri and ilm al-nadhari. And we briefly explained these terms in the previous lesson because they were used before. But now we will look at how Ibn Hajar rahmallah explained these terms. So he says, وَلَاحَ بِهَذَا التَّقَرِيرِ الْفَرْقُ بَيْنَ الْعِلْمِ الضَّرُورِ وَالْعِلْمِ النَّظَرِ. That from this discussion, the difference between definitive knowledge and disputable knowledge becomes apparent. إِذِ الضَّرُورِ يُفِيدُ الْعِلْمِ بِلَا اسْتِدْلَالٍ والنظر يفيده لكن مع الاستدلال على الإفادة. So ضروري, definitive knowledge, gives the benefit of knowledge without istidlal, without reasoning. You don't have to make tahqiq, you don't have to make any research, you don't have to put together things which you know, you don't have to contemplate. وَالنَّظْرِ يُفِيدُهُ. But disputable knowledge, ilm al-nadhari, also gives you knowledge. But here, you will have to first do an inference. You will first have to apply your mind. Then only you will be able to get the knowledge. So this is the first. And then the second difference is an-Naḍaruri يحصل لكل سامع. The definitive knowledge, ilm al-daruri, is obtained for every listener. Everybody understands it. وَالنَّظْرِ لَا يَحْصُلُ إِلَّا لِمَنْ فِيهِ أَهْلِيَةُ النَّظْرِ. And disputable knowledge is not obtained except for the one who has the capacity to contemplate. Here, Allama Qasim Qutlubgha rahimahullah, he raises an objection on the statement of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, إِذِ الضَّرُورِ يُفِيدُ الْعِلْمِ. He says, الضروري هنا صفة العلم فيصير معنى التركيب إذ العلم الضروري يفيد العلم بلا استدلال ولا يخفى ما فيه. That definitely here the word ضروري is the adjective of knowledge. So the sentence now means that definitive knowledge gives the benefit of knowledge without reasoning. So he says that you can clearly see it's not hidden how absurd this is. So he is explaining that daruri is the sifa of the word ilm, and ilm is the mawsuf. So essentially the sentence means that ilm al-daruri gives you ilm, and this here does not make sense. This is the objection that Allama Qasim Qutlubgha rahmallah raised. However, Mullah Liqari rahmallah said that the answer to this objection could be that the mawsuf is something else, and it is not the word ilm. He says, وَيُمْكِنُ دَفْعُهُ بِأَنَّ التَّقْدِيرَ الطَّرِيقُ الضَّرُورِ. So if you say that this here is the mawsuf الطَّرِيقُ الضَّرُورِ, then فَكَانَ الْأَظْهَرِ. وَالْأَخْصَرْ أَن يَقُولْ إِذِ الضَّرُورِ يَحْصُلْ بِلَا اسْتِدْلَالٍ. It would have been a shorter if Ibn Hajar rahmallah merely said إِذِ الضَّرُورِ يَحْصُلُ بِلَا اسْتِدْلَالٍ. That definitely is obtained without reasoning. So this here is the correct understanding that a person should get from the text. Like the student of the author Allama Baqa'i rahimahullah, he said, Al-ilmu al-daruri yustafadu bil istidlal, wal-nadhri yustafadu bil istidlal. هذا صواب العبارة. This is the easy understanding that علم الضروري you will get it, but you don't need to apply your mind. For علم النظري you have to apply your mind and then you will get knowledge. So in this text, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah highlighted two differences between ilm al-daruri and ilm al-nadhari. The first is that ilm al-daruri is knowledge without learning and applying one's mind, and every normal person, like every person above the ages of 5 to 7, he obtains knowledge through ilm al-daruri. And this is in contrast to ilm al-nadhari, because ilm al-nadhari is that knowledge where a person needs to apply their intellect to obtain that knowledge, and also only those who have the ability to reason and comprehend and reflect, they will obtain knowledge. Allama al-Qani rahmallah explained the differences as follows: يحتمل أن المقرر وهو أن الضروري ما لا يمكن للإنسان دفعه عن نفسه كالعلم الحاصل بإحدى الحواس الخمس الظاهرة. That ضروري is something which a person cannot deny. Like if a person saw it with his own eyes, or heard it with his own ears, or he actually felt it, if he perceived it with his 5 senses, then there is no way that he can deny that. So that's علم الضروري. And what's علم النظري? ما يحصل بواسطة ترتيب أمور معلومة أو مظنونة يتوصل بها إلى علوم أو ظنون. It's where a person makes an inference, he puts together various things which he doubts or various things which he knows, and from there he gains knowledge. Now a person may wonder that if the conditions of Tawātur are so crucial, then why did Ibn Hajar rahimahullah not even mention or even indicate to these conditions in the original text in Nukhbatul Fikr? So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah explains this here, and he says innama abhamtu, because it's his kitab, so you can read it like that, or like Shaykh Nuruddin Itra, he put the i'rabs, you can read it as a majhul, that innama ubhimat. So where you want to put it as innama abhamtu shurut al-mutawatir fil asl, that I left the conditions of mutawatir as obscure in the original text. Why? لأنه على هذه الكيفية ليس من مباحث علم الإسناد, because on this basis it is not from the discussion of علم الإسناد. So Ibn Hajar is explaining that since it has nothing to do with his sanad, because you don't even have to look at the sanad, therefore I thought that it's not necessary to mention anything about Tawātur in Nukhbatul Fikr. Whether a report is Tawātur or not has nothing to do with sanad, and in this way the conditions are also not part of the science of ilm al-isnad. And this also clarifies why the majority of scholars who wrote on the subject before Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, they did not discuss this topic of mutawatir. But the key phrase in the sentence of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is ala hadhihi al-kayfiyya. Allama Sindi rahimahullah notes, and he highlights that this phrase is important. Why? Because if you're looking at it only from this particular angle, then Tawātur is not from the chapters of Ilm al-Isnad, and hence it does not pertain to this topic with regards to which this book is written. So this is the excuse that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah gave. But even though Ibn Hajar rahimahullah offers this excuse, some commentators felt that his reasoning is not valid. If he felt it has nothing to do with ilm al-isnad, then he should have left it out completely, isn't? And if he was going to mention it, then he ought to explain it properly. You can't just mention something in brief and a beginner will read it and he won't get the full picture. He might even misunderstand. So his own student, Allama Baqa'i rahmallah, said, بل يجب بيان شروطه ليتميز من غيره فإن شروطه مأخوذة في تعريف المشهور. It was necessary for him to explain the conditions so that it could be differentiated from the other types, because the definition of mutawatir is taken from mashhur. Ibn Hajar explains why it has nothing to do with ilm al-isnad. He says, إذ علم الإسناد يبحث فيه عن صحة الحديث أو ضعفه, Because ilmul isnad, in this particular science, you search and you investigate on the authenticity of a narration or on the weakness of the report. Now here he say an sihhatil hadith. Mullah Liqari rahmallah explains that the word sihha in this passage is in its literal meaning. So that Hasan, which is a term which will come ahead, it basically also refers to acceptable narrations. It could also be included in this word sihhatil hadith. So the whole objective of a sanad is to know the status of a narration. And why do you want to know the status of a narration? لِيُعْمَلَ بِهِ أَوْ يُتْرَكْ. So that you know whether you can practice upon this narration or whether you should leave it out. من حيث صفات الرجال وصيغ الأداء. So you need to look at the status of the narrators and what wording they used to deliver and transmit that report. Is there scope for there being a missing link, or maybe did they use very emphatic and clear words to indicate that they heard directly? والمتواتر لا يبحث عن رجاله. But you do not research and you do not investigate about the Rijal in Tawātur. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah is claiming that when a narration is mutawatir, then narrators do not have to be examined and scrutinized. And this proves that according to Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, the narrators can be sinners and they could even be non-believers. Iman and adala are not conditions for mutawatir, and we discussed this a few lessons back. We also quoted Hafiz Ibn Hajar rahmallah statement earlier, where he said that فَالسَّبَعَةُ الْعَدُولُ ظَاهِرًا وَبَاطِنًا مِثْلُ الْعَشَرَةِ الْعُدُولِ فِي الظَّاهِرِ فقط مثلا فإن الصفات تقوم مقام الذوات بل قد يفيد قول السبعة صلحاء العلم ولا يفيده قول عشر دونهم في الصلاح فالمراد حينئذ المماثلة في إفادة العلم لا في العدد. So when we explain that statement of Ibn Hajar rahmallah, then you remember we also mentioned that Alama Qasim rahmallah, he remarked إذ لا دخل لصفات المخبرين في باب التواتر, that you don't have to look at the attributes of the reporters in Tawātur. So he again stresses this point here by saying هذا يؤيد ما قلناه لا دخل لصفات المخبرين في باب التواتر. This supports what we mentioned earlier, that the attributes of reporters do not enter into the chapter of Tawātur. However, from the Hanafis, Allama Bazdawi rahimahullah, he not only regarded Islam to be an integral condition for Tawātur, he also insisted that the narrators should all be trustworthy. In the previous lessons, when we were quoting from Usul al-Bazdawi, we mentioned the statement of Allama Bazdawi rahimahullah, where he said, وَلَا يُتَوَهَّمُ تَوَاطُؤُهُمْ عَلَى الْكَذِبِ لِكَثْرَتِهِمْ وَعَدَالَتِهِمْ. So he put the word adala as an important condition. And then many books thereafter, which were based on Usul al-Bazdawi, they mention adala as an integral condition. In Nasamatul Ashar, Allama ibn Abidin rahmallah said, لِأَنَّ الْكُفْرَ وَالْفِسْقَ مَذَنَّةُ الْكَذْبِ وَالْمُجَازَفَةِ. That disbelief and transgression, it gives doubt that a person could be lying or he could be reckless. Nonetheless, the majority of Hanafis accepted that Islam and Adala are not necessary. And in addition to that, you should bear in mind that Allama Bazdawi rahimahullah's statement is not confined to Hadith. You remember that he is mentioning it in a book on Usul al-Fiqh, so it refers to general issues, including aspects which are brought before a qadi, etc. And many Hanafi scholars, they give the example of where the inhabitants of a particular place inform others about the demise of their leader. So they mention, for example, Ahlu Qustantiniya law akhbaru, that if the people of Qustantiniya, if they have to mention an mawti malakihim la hasal al ilmu bi khabarihim, if they have to mention about the death and the demise of their leader, then people will trust them. People will be convinced that they're all speaking the truth. Wa in kanu kuffaran, even if the people of that place are disbelievers. So Allama Bazdawi rahmallah that in such issues too, when disbelievers or irreligious people mention something, then you cannot just trust them. In our times, it's very easy to understand this, isn't it? Because we have so many millions of people mentioning blatant lies through the media. Sometimes even it comes on the media that a person passed away, you don't even know whether that is true. Nevertheless, when it comes to Ḥadīth, then Hanafis accept that it is not necessary for all the narrators of a Tawātur narration to have Adalah. Therefore, you will find that Hanafi commentators agreed with the statement of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah. For example, Alama Radiyuddin ibn al-Hanbali rahimahullah, he said, وَمِن شَأْنِهِ أَلَّا يُشْتَرَطُ عَدَالَةُ رِجَالِهِ بِخِلَافِ غَيْرِهِ. And from its matters is that Adala is not a condition for its men unlike others. So that means when it comes to mutawatir narrations, it is not necessary for everyone to be adil. You don't have to scrutinize the narrators. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah said, وَإِن وَرَدَ عَنِ الْفُسَّاقِ بَلْ عَنِ الْكَفَرَةِ. That a mutawatir will be accepted even though it is reported from transgressors and in fact even from disbelievers. In the previous lessons we quoted from Mullah al-Qari rahmallah where he said, لِأَنَّهُ الْمُتَوَاتِرُ وَمِثْلُهُ لَا يُطْلَبُ بسند بخصوصه كالمتواتر لا يبالى فيه بكفر الناقلين فضلا عن فسقهم أو ضعفهم. Mentions that because it is mutawatir and something which is similar to mutawatir, you do not pay attention to the disbelief of the narrators, let alone their transgression or their weakness. A point to note is that when it comes to Ḥadīth, then this is merely mentioned as a principle. It's mentioned in theory. Because in reality, there is no single narration where Muhaddithin did not scrutinize the sanad and ensure that every narrator is reliable. But it is true that after a rigorous scrutiny, the Muhaddithun do group together many weak chains and consider them to be mutawatir. But also then you must remember that there will always be a difference of opinion, that some would regard mutawatir a narration to be mutawatir and others will differ and they will say no, that this narration is not mutawatir. And this goes back to that principle of Alama Jazari rahmallah that we quoted, قد يكون التواتر نسبيا فيتواتر عند قوم دون آخرين كما يصح الخبر عند جماعة دون آخرين. The tawatur may be relative, it may be subjective, that according to some people a narration will be mutawatir but others would not regard it to be mutawatir, just as sahih is subjective and relative. Some would regard a narration to be sahih, whereas others would not regard it to be as sahih. So this is with regards to adala. As for kufr, there is no narration that has been transmitted by disbelievers and considered mutawatir just because of the huge number of narrators. Now Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions a fa'idah. He brings an additional point which is beneficial. But before discussing this, you should know that according to scholars of Hadith, Tawātur has two categories. And I wish to explain these two categories in this lesson so that you can learn them well, and when we read the text ahead, inshallah, in the next lesson, then you will know exactly what we are talking about. So first, let me go through the text of Allama Munawi rahimahullah, and thereafter I will explain it. In Al-Yawaqit wa Durar, Allama Munawi rahimahullah said, وَقَدْ يَكُونُ لَفْظِيًّا أَوْ مَعْنَوِيًّا فَإِنَّهُمْ إِنِ اتَّفَقُوا فِي اللَّفْظِ وَالْمَعْنَى فَلَفْظِيٌّ وَإِنِ اخْتَلَفُوا فِيهَا مَعَ رُجُوعِهِمْ إِلَى مَعْنًى كُلِّيٍّ مُشْتَرَكٍ فِيهِ فَمَعْنَوِيٌّ. So he's saying that a narration could be lafzi or it could be, a tawatur could be lafzi or it could be ma'nawi. If they agree on the exact same words and exact same meaning, then it is lafzi. But if they differed regarding it, but ultimately they all reach a common meaning, then it is ma'nawi. So basically there are two categories of mutawatir. The first is lafzi. This is when all the narrators are referring to the exact same incident, and they're using the exact same wording, or maybe slight differences, but the incident is the same. So the words may differ, but the incident which they are talking about is the same. This is mutawatir. It is Tawātur al-lafzi. Then you have ma'nawi. So this is when there are different incidents that are related. But when you put them all together, then they support the basis of an action. To understand this, Allama Munawi rahmallah gives the following example. He says, وَقَدْ مَثَّلُوا لَهُ بِأَحَادِيث مِنْهَا أَخْبَارُ رَفْعِ الْيَدَيْنِ فِي الدُّعَاءِ فقد ورد عن المصطفى نحو 100 حديث فيها رفع يديه في الدعاء. He's saying that the scholars have given examples of various narrations. So these narrations are such that they all talk about the Prophet ﷺ raising his hands. So the action of raising the hands have been transmitted via 100 narrations. But all are on different occasions. So each individual occasion, each incident is not mutawatir. But when putting all these narrations together, the action of raising their hands becomes mutawatir. So a person one day maybe he saw the Prophet ﷺ raising his hands. He was the only person who saw the Prophet ﷺ. Then after a week, another person saw the Prophet ﷺ raising his hands and making dua. After a month, a third person. After a few months, another person. After a year, more people. After a few years, again, many more seeing the Prophet ﷺ raising his hands. So in each incident, you have just few people and mentioning the Prophet ﷺ raising his hands. But now when grouping it all together, we're saying that definitely the raising of the hands in dua is something which has been done by the Prophet ﷺ, because so many people on different occasions they are mentioning that they saw the Prophet ﷺ raising his hands. So this is the division of mutawatir according to muhaddithin. As for Hanafis, Maulana Anwar Shah Kashmiri rahimahullah, he conducted a detailed study of all the possible Hanafi usul books that he could get, and he concluded that mutawatir is grouped into 4 categories. So I strongly advise that you go through these 4 categories in Al-Madkhal. It's on page 27 and 28. Very briefly, these categories are Tawātur al-Isnad. That's the first category. It is when such a large group of narrators transmit a narration that it is impossible for them to collude upon a lie. And the following example is given: Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa maq'adahu min an-nar. So Sheikh Salah Abul Hajj, the Jordanian Hanafi Sheikh, he wrote a paper titled السنة المتواترة عند الفقهاء وتطبيقها عند الحنفية. And in this paper he scrutinized the 4 types according to Hanafi, and he gave examples. So he stated that the adhan and tashahud will also fall under this category. Then you have Tawātur at-tabaqah. It is something that was passed on from generation to generation. So a group takes from a group, and they in turn take from a group right up until the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So here there is no sanad. For example, the Tawātur of the Quran, it was passed on from generation to generation. Then Tawātur al-amal wa tawaruth. So this refers to practices which were inherited from generation to generation. So you have an extremely large group of people who performed an action, and it's so many people that it's impossible for them to agree and collude upon a lie. Then the next generation continued to perform that same action. The following generation also continued. So examples of these include the 5 salawat and fasting, also visiting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's qabr. And the 20 rak'ats of Taraweeh can also be included in this. You know, Alama Atiyah Muhammad Salim, he wrote a book, التراويح أكثر من 1000 عام في مسجد النبوي عليه السلام. It's important that you do not confuse this with the customs of our forefathers, because remember the key words here are from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you have practices coming from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then the fourth is Tawātur al-Qadr al-Mushtarak. It is when something is transmitted solitarily, but together the transmissions equal to a huge amount. So the individual actions are not mutawatir, but when all the individual narrations are combined, then the combination proves that the action was definitely conducted. This is exactly what we explained as Tawātur al-Ma'nawi. Sheikh Salah Abul Hajj, he gave 53 examples of this. Amongst others, he cited the example of wiping on leather socks. You know, Imam Abu Hanifa rahmallah said, ما قلت بالمسح على الخفين حتى وردت فيه آثار أضوأ من الشمس. He said that I did not say in agreement of wiping over the khuffain until such a hadith reached me that were even more clearer than the day. So there are 80 companions who narrated from the Prophet ﷺ that he wiped over leather socks. However, they all saw the Prophet ﷺ do this action at different times. So when you have to individually look at their reports, it's not mutawatir. All 80 people did not see the Prophet ﷺ doing this action at the same time. But when putting all these reports together, then no one can ever doubt that the Prophet ﷺ did indeed wipe over leather socks. Therefore, together all the narrations become mutawatir. Although these are additional categories from the Hanafis, the Muhaddithin do not deny that all these four categories are also mutawatir. Inshallah, we'll stop the lesson here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.